So I can't help but go back to thinking about all the people who like to lump specific beliefs into ideologies, worldviews, closed systems, or outgrowths of those ideologies. A good example is when people call something neo-Marxist or post-Marxist or something like that. I was thinking about all those people because there's all these beliefs that are perfectly sensible, whether you agree with them or not. They're perfectly sensible as standalone beliefs, or even just, programs and initiatives. In the US, DEI. I can't tell you how often I've seen, usually on Twitter, someone call DEI and various other programs associated with DEI, as long as it's proggy seeming. People call that neo-Marxist or just outright Marxist. Can't tell you how often I've seen that, and it's especially glaring when you take a break from these mouth-breathy platforms where all these babblers keep showing up day after day to essentially do the same thing without realizing they're running on both autopilot and a redundant kind of autopilot. But I don't want to complain about them because I've done that before enough. But here, for a specific thing that I need to do just for my peace of mind, just set the record straight. There's a rule of thumb that I'm going to propose here. It's not always applicable. There are exceptions, but I think this works as a rule of thumb. So why is it naive to build on these superficial similarities? Because I'm not saying there's zero similarities between an initiative like DEI, I'll stick to DEI as my example, and the kind of, anti-oppression Olympics, if you want to be derisive, these political theories that are rooted in kind of examining political economy from the standpoint of there being oppression and there being essential conflicts in society, right? So why is it cheap and ultimately inaccurate to build on certain kinds of, superficial similarities in the way of there being the oppressed and the oppressors? It was so nice and peaceful here up until a minute ago. But it's the only outside audio for this whole video. Everything else that I'm gonna put in this video is gonna be indoors, so you'll pardon me. Why is it cheap and ultimately inaccurate to build upon these, oppressed versus oppressors, and to, from that standpoint, think that you're being shrewd in calling something like DEI ultimately Marxist or Marxist inspired? Like, why is that stupid? I can see why it's tempting. For example, someone who, they've grown up and all their life long they've heard, Pops or Gramps go off on, the evil Marxists or the stupid Marxists. But back then, it would have been in these strictly economic and political, narrow political context, whereas nowadays it's usually someone takes an issue. If I see some, Marxism is bad rant online, it's usually a cultural grievance that's at the bottom of it. Scarcely ever, economic. At least, if you navigate the corners of the internet I do, that's kind of that's the norm. Contemporary Marxism, to the extent that it is booed because the person who's doing the booing thinks it a cultural force. But it's inaccurate. And the best way to see why it's inaccurate in the case of DEI or, whatever else, the Floyd summer, the George Floyd summer, and the craziness associated with that. Like, people think that ultimately the reason people can rationalize the fact that the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis was burned down by the rioters and stuff like that, the reason so many progressives look away is because they're still under the spell of a kind of neo-Marxism. And that's inaccurate. And all you have to do to realize why it's inaccurate is just picture an alternative timeline where Marx writes nothing. Maybe Marx doesn't even exist, but let's just say Marx writes nothing and no one else writes anything comparable to what he wrote. And so there is no such, anything like that ideology in this alternative timeline. Now, despite that, certain other people can still exist that are exactly the way they are in this timeline. And so the specific advocates you can have in mind here are these race hustlers, Michael Eric Dyson, Nicole Hannah Jones, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Ibram X. Kendi, Cornel West, who's still running for president as deluded as he is, right? All those people, maybe I should exclude Cornel West because he is an avowed Marxist, but the rest of them, you can see how it's perfectly intelligible, it's perfectly conceivable, it's not unfathomable that those people would believe the exact same things they believe right now in a world where Marxism just doesn't exist. So that's a good rule of thumb, I think, as to when you should versus should not refer to something as neo-Marxist, with the motivation being you just want to jeer or boo Marxism the way your pops or gramps did. That's what I think is at the bottom of it, and it's a nice black and white kind of world you get to live in when you convince yourself that all bad things or most bad things spring from the same root, at least in civil life. And that's a kind of nice, comfy reassurance that, well, they must be guided by Marxism. But it's perfectly intelligible if all those people, right, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Abraham X. Kendi, so on and so forth, right, you can see why they would talk the exact kind of talk and believe in the exact same kinds of things they believe right now in an alternative timeline where nothing like Marxism exists. And why is that perfectly intelligible? Because the thing that drives them at the bottom is flattery. They flatter themselves and they flatter their racial group and perhaps advance socially or professionally when those kinds of beliefs are in high demand. But I'm going to say flattery, either self-flattery or group identity flattery. Like once you fail to be embarrassed at the fact that flattery works on you in terms of guiding your beliefs, which is just clearly the number one thing in terms of all these race hustlers in contemporary America, right? Which was not the case with, certainly original Marxism. Maybe some people signed up for Marxism just because they conceived of themselves as members of the quote-unquote working class, which wait till I get into that, the next segment after this one. Members of the working class. So you can see how that's also a kind of flattery, but, a lot of the kind of card-carrying Marxists weren't. They were, the silver spoon-fed types of people. So flattery is not applicable there. But insofar as you want to flatter yourself at the level of group identity, qua blackness, or at the level of a white ally who is perfectly willing to spot all those same falsehoods and kind of ignore statistical trends in terms of like who attacks who more, which racial group, just on the ground, on the individual ground level, which racial group attacks, which members from racial group attack which members from some other racial group, right? It's mostly black attacking white, and so then the stories about structural racism and all this other stuff. You get to just white out all the ugly facts on the ground. And it's very flattering, either for someone who is black and wants to flatter themselves qua group identity, or as a kind of morally informed white ally or whatnot. So this is all perfectly intelligible. As stupid as the beliefs are, and as statistically ignorant as the beliefs are, statistics is just a shoo, go away kind of inconvenience. It's not something that's an outgrowth of Marxism. It can exist. It's so clear that it can exist identically to how it does now because flattery really is that powerful and all these other social forces truly are that powerful. But you can't seemingly explain that to the person who's just so eager to round off all those beliefs into some sort of neo-Marxist either plot or just, emergent properties. Contemporary anti-racism as an emergent property that still has its roots in Marxism. But I think it's just beyond clear. I don't know, maybe there's a few people who just do it in a Machiavellian way. They call anything that's the least bit proggy, they call it Marxist because then they can, it's a good look for them and it's a bad look for those progs. Because certainly in America, Marxism is about as unpopular, if you look at the polls, as it's ever been. So yes, Marxism is stupid. Identity politics of all stripes, including the racial one, is stupid, but they don't mutually rely on each other. And all you have to do to realize that is just picture a world where Marx doesn't write anything, no one else writes anything comparable to what he wrote, and nonetheless picture someone like, I don't know, maybe even Ta-Nehisi Coates is a Marxist, and maybe the rest of the people I mentioned are Marxists too. So, maybe just pick some other racial hustler who's an avowed non-Marxist, but who nonetheless does the, oppressor thing in some other domain of life that has nothing to do with economics, a domain of life like, racial identity. They do it, and they would have done it in the exact same way had there been no Marxism in the alternative timeline. Because flattery is a hell of a drug. All right, I think I've made my case. God, this is too long now. It means the video is going to be super long. I was going to do another rant talking about all these arrows. I'm going to do a quick pan of the arrows now. None of this was a thing, but now, certainly in thumbs, everywhere you look, one arrow after another, because it does clearly garner more hits. And so it just doesn't matter. People will just compromise anything in terms of their how they want to do thumbs. They'll just there's no limit to the amount of clown makeup they'll throw in their thumbs, just as long as it's going to help with the clicks. And I'm kind of annoyed with it because I was doing the arrow thing, not in my thumbnails, but within my videos. I do my little scraggedy arrow things. And all of a sudden, everyone's doing it too, but they're kind of nice and straight arrows. And they exist in thumbs only. It's just, they're so at ease, stylistically, appearing as if they're just manufactured goods. Because that's what I see now. When I see a video where its thumbnail has one of those arrows or circle things in it, I just think it's like you're advertising what a manufactured good like quality your video is. But it doesn't matter because it's proven to there's a reason they do it, because it can double, if I recall rightly the kind of stat I read, it doubles the hits in some instances. I don't know. There's just that many mouth-breathy retards who are. It tempts them. A thumbnail with a little arrow tempts them to click it. And so just person after person, I'll utilize that. It's like, well, why utilize it if you weren't going to utilize it for any reason apart from the fact that your video will get more clicks? It's disgusting. But I got to save the disgusting stuff for my YouTube is Dumpster Fire video, which is delayed again. Oh, but before I proceed with the next section, I just have to do this quick timestamp. Since I know this is about the time in the video where people start to tune out and depart. So if you're going to depart, do so after you go to this specific timestamp, much later in the video, for a music thingy. That's all. God, this last Ezra Klein podcast, I've not finished it, but the title is, Why Haven't the Democrats Completely Cleaned the Republicans' Clock? It's the sort of thing a reasonable person might ask here and there. This is a whole conversation. I don't know who his guest is. It doesn't matter. It's one of these, pollster, insider people. So they're breaking things down. The title is, Why Haven't the Democrats Completely Cleaned the Republicans' Clock? Electorally being implied, and just kind of culture dominantly. Like, why isn't it a culturally dominant party, given all the craziness in the GOP? And it just gets so hung up on this working class versus non-working class. And I just want to come out and say, I'm a non-cognitivist on all this stuff. The working class term has lost its meaning. It only made sense when the elites didn't work in any defensible sense of the term work. But so, I've made this point before, but what really gives the term its non-cognitivist flavor is the fact that some of the most hardworking people are people who are in the elite in terms of their income level. They work these 16-hour days. They're these hedge fund managers. There's been books written that point this out at length. The meritocracy book. Why isn't everyone else a working class as rhetoric? Non-cognitivist. Why do people think these terms are loaded with meaning? How can you think that someone who works 16-hour days in a stressful line of cognitive labor style work, where it's just one kind of ASAP task after another? Why can't we call those people as members of the working class simply because their income level is elite level?
we have to be non-literalists on the meaning of the word work. Why would we ever want to do this? You're working class, but you can't make beyond a certain point. Just call it the middle class, right? But no, that doesn't have the halo potential as working does, the working class. And just in relation to that, some of the most annoying people who talk about George Orwell's, I think, 1948 essay, Politics in the English Language, like they tell you to read that essay, and it's a fairly insightful essay, but it's like so often those who recommend it, who have read it themselves, like you pay attention to them long enough, they'll use the word working class mindlessly without appreciating the fact that no, it's not 1924. Now the elites really do work. I'd rather, after the January I had to take on some supervisory shifts. I didn't really have to, but I didn't want to be difficult, so I accepted them. But I hadn't done supervisory work in a long time. I had to do it on 4 nights. I was supposed to do it on 6 nights, but I did it on 4 because I did 2 swaps that no one noticed. But I did it on these 4 nights, and it just ate up my January. It's not manual labor, it's all cognitive labor, but it's just stressor after stressor, and you feel like you're being pulled apart in a supervisory role. You feel like you're being pulled apart for 8 hours because there's these things that need to be done simultaneously for 8 hours. But it's not anything like hard manual labor. But given a certain point, like it doesn't matter. They are primitivists about why work has that halo. The essence of work has that halo because truly it's manually hard. It's physically tough, and that's why it has to. If it had any potential as an analysis, it was during the industrial era. This potential where you form whole fucking ideologies on the idea that a certain percent of the society fits this term, working class. What percent is it? How large is it supposed to be? When does it exceed its limit? Can 95% of the people be the working class now or before? Like, these are questions that don't get posed. Like, what exact percent of the society is the working class allowed to be? Can it exceed a certain size? And people think it's just loaded with meaning. It's not. It's arbitrary. And the more elites I see just completely lose their lives and lose the best of their cognitive self in work and have nothing left, but still live gloriously and glamorously from a material standpoint. But I see that the best of them drained in their work. Like, I'm not going to say they're not members of the fucking working class just because they're really, really affluent. It's just stupid. You're demeaning the word work by just refusing to use the word like middle class. It's a perfectly apt word, but it doesn't have that halo. And even the way middle class has been used with time, now most of the time, I think people want to say upper middle class, but they don't. They just say middle class. But back, there was more kind of caution about, like, are we talking about that upper middle class? But anyway, I worked these supervisory shifts in January, and it just completely ate me up. It changed the way I thought. Before work, after work, I just thought about work way too fucking much, even when I was off the fucking clock. But it's nothing like that halo style of industrial work, industrial era. Oh, manufacturing. We're gonna talk for eternity about how America lost its manufacturing base because there were 4 free trade and other nations offered a cheaper deal. Oh, but America lost its No, if any kind of conflict theory needs to exist, it's not along these class lines, but it's along the lines of this kind of scholastic conflict theory that I offer up. You watch those kind of videos with me talking about how none of the educational reformers are talking the kind of talk I'm talking. We're talking about recognizing autodidacts. So this is why I'm so unimpressed with economic conflict theories. It's because none of them touch on this true point where certain people are poorly served while others are well served, is when I talk about my scholastic conflict theory, qua me as an autodidact. Now there's a conflict theory that you can really grab at, not these, on the basis of class, oversimplifications of economic life. and other kinds of social life. These are just oversimplifications, just as CRT is, just as any kind of anti-CRT thing about the homeland is also an oversimplification. This can only appeal to people who are not individually complete. If you're individually complete, you'll reach further back and you'll think about whether or not you were well served by the scholastic system, that your parents were going to get in trouble if you were not going to attend. Your parents were going to get in legal trouble qua these, what are they called? You know, there's just these scholastically hawkish people that think it's really important for kids to attend public fucking schools if their parents aren't going to send them to private schools, and if their parents aren't going to homeschool them. Then there's these fucking scholastic hawks where it's like, even if you're 14 years old, if you stop attending school, they'll believe your parents ought to be in some way legally prosecuted and at worst serve jail time. Now there's a fucking conflict theory because that didn't serve me well. I didn't need that kind of burden on me. That's why I fucking stayed in school. I didn't want those truancy laws coming after my folks. They didn't deserve that. But I didn't deserve to have my time wasted. You reach further back, you'll see where the true conflict theory arises. It's none of this polished stuff that the media covers. This stuff about class and race and, you know, these categories that they can't precisify. They themselves will tell you that scientifically you can't precisify race. And if they've precisified class, tell me exactly what percent of the Americans are working class, are underclass, and are upper class. Tell me, percentage-wise. No one can agree on this because it's all just ambiguous notions. But it's not ambiguous when I'm talking about my scholastic conflict theory and how autodidacts just get the raw end of the deal. We get strung along, we have our time wasted when we could have just learned much better at our own pace, not early in the fucking morning when we're still half asleep, and all these other rules that we had to follow because it was an assembly line mindset. I hate having been used for societal ends as an individual, ultimately for an assembly line mindset that's there for the purposes of efficiency that doesn't serve me anyway. Most of what's produced, I don't benefit from. I'm not this constant consumer of things. But I was sacrificed on the altar of a scholastic kind of automation because they can't serve each pupil individually, because truly speaking, the pupils are too individually dissimilar. But it didn't matter. It was a fucking assembly line mindset. That's the true conflict theory. But it's not being covered. Instead, they want to draw upon like how much money you make. And if you bust your ass and make like $1 million a year, you can't be called a member of the working class. Like that's supposed to have some sort of sway. Why should I have that? No, I'm a non-cognitivist on all that crap. So the true conflict theories are these, like what happened to you while you were at your most developmentally sensitive? Like what happened to you? Were you a part of some assembly line while you were a teenager and truly fragile? And truly, this was the time that you were supposed to be able to devote to yourself for the most part, not to some societal end. And then the other part is like how puberty screws up an individual, which, yes, that's coming up as well. But it can't be this video because this video has just gone on way too long. This is just tail end. I just had to rant about, I had to throw my work stuff in. Work pretty much incapacitated me throughout the month of January because I had these 4 supervisory shifts I had to work. Just the level of responsibility and entitlement. I could sit here for another hour and just talk about all the individual things that are wrong outside of my normal line. My normal line comprises maybe 1/4 of the overall things that take up my department since 2021. I've fallen into this sweet spot as a person who has seniority there. I'm in this sweet spot where I only have to worry about the most kind of liability sensitive things, but that cover only 25% of all the things that take place within my department. I'm watching kind of the crown jewel, but having to take on these supervisory shifts, I had to be reintroduced to all the inefficiency and all the kind of contractual overpromising that comprises the other 75%. I had to step back into all that goo and all that kind of managerial salesmanship that really we feel the brunt of overnight. that I don't have to fucking worry about. But as a supervisor, it felt like there were hundreds of axes dangling over my head because there were all these things that had to be done simultaneously, and there's never a shortage of paperwork. You fucking fart, you fill out a sheet noting down that you farted. And if someone else farts, you freaking make them fill out the sheet. That's not true. That's just for comedic kind of overlays, but Jesus fucking Christ. And then they didn't pay me the supervisory rate. They didn't pay me the fucking supervisory rate. And I'm not going to make a fuss about it. I can fill out a form, but I'm not going to make a fuss about it because it's not about the money. There's no amount of money they could pay me to do that regularly. No, I'm happy in my high liability but low variability world at work. There's a certain number of things I have to memorize, and then I'm good. That 75%, like, woe be to management, woe be to corporate, woe be to all these things. These are all cults. The members of corporate that we're contractually kind of slavish to because it rewards a lot of people a lot of money. But apparently I can't be paid the supervisory rate. But anyway, the kind of contractual slavishness that we feel the brunt of on the ground overnight, like corporate would have to be a cult member. They must be cult members to fail to see that this is an overpromising. So I'm going to have to barge in there. I'm going to have to barge into corporate and give a kind of, you guys only hear what you want to hear. And it's like I'm talking to cult members types of rants. I'm going to have to do it. I did these 4 supervisory shifts. Like it just completely wrecked me mentally. Ate up what was supposed to be good philosophical time. And I'm resentful over it. I'm going to have to give some kind of a speech that the guy gives in network. I'm going to have to barge into corporate and give that kind of speech. Maybe this can be the kind of the liftoff point. That's how resentful I am that it ate up so much of my time post-occupationally. I can't stop fretting when I'm in a position that expects like a lot of responsibility and a lot when I'm made to have a lot to answer for. I just fret over it before and after work. Don't ever fucking tell me that cognitive labor is any less to be haloed than manual manufacturing. Oh, they lost their manufacturing base. Oh, we're gonna be concerned about it ever more in the press because it's manufacturing base. Oh, those poor people. No one has a fucking right to work for a fucking sawmill all their life long. I'm tired of all the sympathy extended to these people. Where's the sympathy to me? No, I'm gonna have to give the network speech. Thank you for humoring me. Thank you, folks. Oh, and just a quick interjection on that. Another misuse of language that the George Orwell essay enthusiasts I've seen commit over and over again is just say social mobility to denote economic mobility. You know, financial kind of, you make it, you're here, you got the promotion, you know, the kind of thing that Will Smith acts out in that 2007 movie, The Pursuit of Happiness. Hilariously titled movie considering that it's about getting the promotion, it's about getting the cash. I know he lived hand to mouth and he had a brat, but, you know, that he's not to be haloed for that he had a brat that he couldn't afford. Anyway, another misuse that I see the proponents of the George Orwell essay that's about language and how you should think about language being used to deceive people, especially in their political thinking. You know, people shout about that essay and praise that essay, and then they use a word like social mobility when they truly mean either class mobility or economic mobility. But they say social mobility. No, social mobility is when you're born and raised unpopular and you die popular. That's social mobility. Or, you know, infamous or notorious, let's say. You were non-notorious when you were born and raised, and then at some point you became notorious and maybe appreciated, but for the most part, notably notorious, and then you died. You die notorious. That's social mobility. If you're going to be literal about the word social, which it's very important that a word like social, that we're always literal about it and that we don't apply dual applications to a word like social. Whereas like, it's just the word economic piggybacks on the word social. That's what happens when they talk about social mobility. No, they're talking about people, making more the longer they live. They get, raise after raise, but they refer to it as social mobility. And now they're in a new class. No, but social mobility is you're born and raised and no one knows about you, and then you die and a lot of people know about you. That's fucking social mobility. Your friendship count rises with age. It's friendship over time. But not saying anyone should care about that anyway, but it's just like, people who talk about George Orwell's essay should be making these kinds of points about this misuse and sneaky dual use of really important words that should have a kind of their own narrow range. The social dimension is a narrow kind of range if we're going to be analytical about things. It can have economics piggybacking on it. Yes, I'm a stickler for words these days, still. Oh, and finally, since I'm all about terms that are being misused and oddly used, finally, social media is a term no one should ever use. Why are flame wars on Twitter social media? Whereas flame wars, from decades ago on random forums with a lot of people observing, was just called the internet. Why? No one has managed to explain to me, right? And yet, person after person, even allegedly well-informed people who tell you to go read George Orwell's Politics in the English Language, just mindlessly start saying social media, right? People very critical of social media call it that. No, we're all just surfing the net, just like we were decades ago when we hung out on I don't know where you hung out, but I hung out on forums often, seen many a flame war and even participated in some, and everyone just understood. It's not like it was just some branch of the internet that we were going to call the internet, and then there was this other branch of the internet that we were going to call something else, and the lines were all arbitrary. No, we just understood it was all the internet. Nowadays, people just mindlessly accepted that some usually very buzzy corners of the internet, it's not just the internet, it's social media. I defy anyone to defend that we need to call certain quarters of the internet social media. No, just the name sounds stupid in and of itself because it's got the word social in it. And it should not first and foremost be like people interacting. It should not be conceived of as that being in some sense a media. No, like insofar as people are relaying their earnest thoughts in the way I do, in these audios, but I'm doing it on YouTube. At least I think I'm going to keep doing this on YouTube. Who knows long term? But I don't want the scourge of the word media associated with anything I do. But insofar as I do it on YouTube, it's conceived of as social media, right? If I disclose that I have a YouTube channel, like people think, oh, so you're on social media. I don't want to be conceived of as someone who's on social media. I'm just on the fucking internet. Like no, not like I've always been. I'd like to think like I've always been, but that's not true. I'm a latecomer. I wasn't online regularly till late 2004. Way too tardy on that. Anyway, that's the last kind of word grievance I have is people who keep saying social media. It's stupid. It's just the fucking internet. Stop being uncritical about the things that you don't see anyone else criticize, right? Reach further back. You reach further back, you'll be a pioneer. It's going to make it less likely that you're going to have an audience because people like to parrot. So, I don't know, do whatever the fuck you want, but for Pete's sake, don't say social media. Oh, right, the Ezra Klein podcast with the pollster guy. It's a fine podcast. That's why I started this whole thing. It's one of the reasons. It was a springboard kind of thing to reference the podcast. I just wanted to point out, in itself, it was fine. The two of them just got way too hung up on the working class element in why the Dems aren't ahead, clearly, and why, so many people are worried. Even though they have no reason to be, they have at most reason to be concerned. But that's a whole thing for a different upcoming video that I can't go into now. You can be concerned, but you can't be worried. If you're worried, you're way too invested. One of the worst things you can be is over-invested. It just shows to me that you're too embedded in society if you have that feeling or just the attitude of worry, right? Not even just to defend it intellectually, but just to feel it. The only thing I really fret in terms of public discourse is just when I see that there's a point that can be made that no one else makes. And so those are the kinds of points I try to seize upon.
And this is an era I want the 19th century.
Correct. In the 19th
century, people didn't think there was a cure for what we today would call paranoid schizophrenia or manic depression or these kinds of mental illnesses. They were conditions that there really wasn't much to do, right, about it.
Correct. There was no cure, and there was not even a biological conception of there being illnesses. And you can imagine also if someone had what today we would call bipolar disorder, they might go for a time, recover, and leave. It's also worth knowing that 20% of people who have a psychotic break and are diagnosed with schizophrenia simply never have another one. And so what, of course, that also means is if you were given some crackpot treatment, like spun in a giant chair, you could see the psychiatrist thinking, well, 20% of my patients recovered. Isn't that amazing?
Right.
But in any case,
I really don't think I'm going to make a habit out of referencing Eli Lake, but there's another great episode. So just to reference the other great episode, is from June 8th, 2023. It's called Why We Fail the Victims of Madness. Here a bit, they're into Kennedy's kind of trying to be a mover and shaker on this. So this is the guest, but I want to make an important distinction. So I think Freud was wrong because it cheapened madness, because madness has to be something that, you're going to want to see why it's good for you to be committed for a while, self-committed to an institution, insofar as the institution, you can see, is meritorious and there's competence from a psychoneurology, something that was pre-neurology, right? Insofar as you're afflicted with madness, it's been explained to you, or you yourself know it. Like, it's going to be something serious enough that's going to motivate you to commit yourself to an institution where you can be looked after 24/7 if you have madness, not just these, small little episodes of stuff like frenzy or mania, but no, true, lasting, kind of prolonged madness. And you understand that you have it. People call into question your recollection of the past and stuff like that, and you've noticed that's a trend, and so you're mad, right? The way Freud relayed madness, or the way he formulated madness, is like, and they got into this in the podcast, but madness is something that really afflicts you due to just daily life in modern society, or just society in general. The family, so Freud was very skeptical, let's say, of the family. And it's just yet another thing where it's just this ping pong. There's people who are way too overly pro-family, and there's people who are way too overly nay family. And Freud was on the kind of, whoa, watch out family thing. But it's all about compatibility. But Freud pretty much said the family makes you sick, right? And of all my scathing critiques of how, parental authority and familial authority, and these are kinds of forms of collectivism. Like, for all my critiques of the family, like, I'd never go so far as to say, just as a matter of routine, the family makes you sick. But Freud outright argued the family makes you sick. So these are strong terms. And likewise with madness, he just relaxed it too much, right? He relaxed madness because he just said it, just the daily life, the keeping up with the Waltons, the kind of, not the Waltons, keeping up with whoever it was. These kinds of things induce psychopathology. So everyone's just suffering from one or another kind of psychopathology. We're all mad because of the hectic nature and the kind of phony, facade-like nature of modern society. It's madness-inducing. That was Freud. But then it's like, wouldn't you want to commit yourself to an institution if you thought you were mad? But if he waters it down, then no, I don't. If I'm perfectly adaptable to the circumstance and am nonetheless mad, but I don't want to commit myself to an institution because I don't fear for my well-being, insofar as I am competent and adapted to something that is, I guess, sick ultimately, right? Then what are we going to call those who can't adapt to it and who go bonkers and who actually need others, like specialists, to look after themselves? Freud just cheapened madness and I haven't heard the whole episode, but I hope that that's what they conclude. I hope that's what they say by the end of it. Freud just cheapened madness. You could be mad and nonetheless perfectly fitted to even thrive by any kind of sense of well-being. You have to be mad just by existing and coexisting with modern society, but nonetheless, you can thrive in all these ways, and you can even, save society as one of these, phlegmatic people who, the intellect is always at their post. The generals, the ministers, the ambassadors, even they're mad, but like they're so ultra competent. This just, I'm kind of giddy that I'm talking about this episode, but I just want to note. He said the family made you sick. A lot of things stemming from childhood are why you as an adult are sick. This is kind of Freudian psychopathology 101. I've never really talked about it in a single video, but I've just kind of rekindled my interest listening to this podcast into it. I would just swap the word sick or deviant with repressed. That was kind of the point of the audio. Because here, listen to what they say. They're talking about Kennedy now, but keep in mind, instead of sick or deviant, Freud's approach gets at something. It's just the words he used. I think if you observe all the latent things that you've come to know, if you're paying attention to your own life, all the latent things that have come explicit, why weren't they explicit from the get-go? Because of repression. Being straight edge helps with repression? I didn't even drink coffee till 2010, so I know a thing or two about thinking that I have to be straight edge in the name of in the misguided search for some kind of personal virtue. The more I stopped being straight edge, the more I saw how repression ruled the roost. Freudian approach gets at some of this, except it uses way strong terms like sickness and deviance. And cheapens madness in the process, where it's like you can be mad without needing to be confined to an institution. Okay, well then what kind of word do we use for those who do need to be confined to an institution, or else they're gonna cause profound harm to themselves or others? Because they're mentally, fundamentally unreliable. Madness has to be understood as something where you're just fundamentally unreliable and unsafe to yourself and others. But that wasn't Freud's approach to madness. So I like Freud's approach. If we just call it the end result, we just call it repression. I like Freud's approach then. If we call it something like sickness, it just cheapens these actual things that we actually should call psychopathologies, and that actually anti-psychotic drugs do far more good than harm to quell. And they get into this as well in this wonderful episode, into the quirkiness of the fact that LSD came out the same year as anti-psychotic drugs. One induced delusions, and I guess not delusions, but one induced illusions, and the other did everything to stamp them out and mask them. One was celebrated, while the other was, by the very same people, condemned and hastily condemned. And if you look at if you crunch the pluses and the minuses of these anti-psychotic drugs, it's a big plus. Listen to these guys in the podcast, man. His guest is very insightful. His guest lived this.
Kennedy gives this speech about the warmth of communal care, and the idea is that now that there are these drugs, people can be released. What's interesting, though, is that
people can be released. This podcast is also about the concentration camp-like conditions in the mental health institutions, the psych wards, the asylums, the sanitariums. But what existed before? These were an improvement. What existed before is people would be just chained. If they showed signs of lunacy or, possession by the devil, they'd just be chained in these basements or attics. And the asylums were an improvement. But then by mid-20th century, it was likened to the Holocaust. These conscientious objectors who weren't drafted, they went on to volunteer to kind of examine the conditions in these psych wards and mental institutions of mid-20th century America. And, what was it, Time magazine came in and snipped photos of the releases or of the kind of captives being freed. And they likened him to the photos of the Jews being freed in the concentration camps. It was just Time magazine ran this stuff.
It was a beautiful, hopeful speech, except that it spoke about a new emphasis on
This is Kennedy's speech.
prevention and treatment and cure. And there were no preventions for people with severe mental illness, and there were no cures. And you would have to then only be speaking in terms of the psychopathology of everyday life, in terms of Freud's idea that everyone is ill because of childhood repression, just in different degrees. And that way, in a...
Ill. So words like sickness, illness, deviance. No, it's overkill, but it is repression. Freud's approach identifies correctly so much repression that, like, if you're one of these straight edge people, this is like the third video now of caution against being straight edge all your life long. By all means, be straight edge throughout your adolescence, brain still developing. Hell, be straight edge till your 30s. On 30, you should have smoked one frickin' joint at least. Hit up your favorite records. You'll learn to fly in ways you never knew you can fly. You're the superhero. Being straight edge all your life long, odds are, in whatever way you fly, it's not going to be that way. And also, it's going to unlock all kinds of things about these masked repressions that Freud, I think, correctly identified, but then went a few steps too far, using very strong terminology that should be confined to those who need to be confined for their own good. And hopefully are willing to do that, volitionally.
sense at the very moment when they were going to be releasing people with severe illness who would need an intensive amount of care, but who really could be released, mental illness itself was redefined. And even think about the name.
And really cheapened because it was broadened.
It's the their community mental health centers. Imagine if you knocked down Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital because you were going to build mobile cancer centers. But then you decided to call them mobile health units. And everybody
had cancer, right?
Or that someone felt that if you did meditation and yoga and ate properly, the chances of you getting cancer might be diminished. And so you have these young idealistic teams, and they're going around teaching everybody yoga and good diet, and somebody with stage 4, lung cancer comes along and says, I need chemotherapy, and they say, oh, we're not set up for that, but there's a yoga class at 2. Yeah, and in a sense, when you read accounts by amazing memoirs of young psychologists, I read an account by a guy who created the Baltimore Mental Health Center, Community Mental Health Center. They were all about working in inner city Baltimore, as they saw it, and people were made ill in their minds because of racism and poverty and marginalization. And the one group of people, he says, they would not take are those released from hospitals because they required so much care that it would overwhelm them. And of course, they were just as marginalized and discriminated against. And what did they do? He tells you, he says they called the cops. And
I think they were too rough on the progressives, early 20th century progressives. Earlier in the episode, they were pretty rough because, the word eugenics, they're made fearful of it. But, you got to hit up Diana F. something's article on eugenics. I wonder how they'd respond to that. Those are good times. Social Darwinism is still a dirty word, but this was a kind of let's just recognize the facts for what they are approach to social Darwinism, not, hey, let's have these pit bulls fight against each other because it's amusing to us and we're social Darwinists. No. There's a slyness to how the word social Darwinism is used. It's kind of applicable to the early part of this podcast. There's a lot of things that are kind of eugenic that no one calls eugenic. Things that couples do when they're pregnant, all kinds of screening. Hit up that essay by Diana F. something, or me having read it out to see that, we're all eugenicists. But we're not all social Darwinists, but there's a slyness to how the word social Darwinism is used by people who think they're being responsible by using it. But it's you're just impugning the word eugenics by association, and it's just there's a lot of people who practice eugenics. It's just not called eugenics. Well, instead of just randomly referencing the earlier part of the podcast, since I've invoked it, I might as well go back to it and play it so you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Princeton University is wrapped up in all of this, the IQ test for World War I as well as the SAT. And it all is coming from these terrible ideas of eugenics. Yeah.
Yes, nothing wrong with measuring intelligence. In fact, the person who devised it in France had done it originally as a way of helping people who needed extra accommodation. That's
nothing wrong with it insofar as you can capture a kind of round sense of intelligence, what Charles Murray refers to as G. But I don't think that's round enough. I think certain types of people who excel cognitively in certain ways there's nothing in those tests that'll cater to their strengths.
It's the irony of the thing.
Yeah.
It's just that if you eliminate the idea that everyone's created equally in the image of God, if you eliminate the Declaration of Independence for all its other flaws, then what is your measurement? What is your unit of measurement? So that is
Yeah, there are secular traditions, one of them being, I guess, the utilitarian tradition. Utilitarianism, in at least one sense, is egalitarian in terms of the moral considerateness of each individual. That's one example. I guess in another sense, it's inegalitarian because it looks at each individual's usefulness to, serve the whole, and maybe will consider those who are better able to serve the whole. They'll consider their interests more so than the interests of those who are maybe parasitic on the whole. Plausibly, this is a kind of long-term thing for a utilitarian vision of ethics. But there's other irreligious traditions. You don't need that, and you certainly don't need the Declaration of Independence. And first and foremost, you need to encourage a apolitical kind of program that clamps down on biases, commonplace biases. It's kind of stuff I talk about when I encourage, we send kids, instead of sending kids to school, we send them to rationality boot camp. So they see all the little inconsistencies that people who spout the importance of things like the Declaration of Independence. These are all just legalistic conveniences that get trotted out so that people don't really have to think about the kind of commonplace biases. Like, if you have a family member who you really dislike, and let's say it's an immediate family member, you dislike them, might be your parent or a spouse or even a child. You really dislike them. And you have some other non-family members, you have some friend, some acquaintance that you know, and you really like and respect them. But there's an emergency, and so you can rescue only one of the two. Or let's say you have two friends who you respect more than your one family member. And there's this emergency that happens. You can only save the two friends versus the one family member. You don't respect your family member, but all the kind of cultural tugs indicate that you'd be an asshole to not save your family member. So yeah, you can have all the, Declaration of Independence, all the kind of all men are created equal, blah, 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 all this legalistic stuff that you want. But at the end of the day, the culture is clannish and familial, among other things that make it very inegalitarian. And that matters too. So this whole idea that, the secularists have something to account for, or the rationalists have something to account for, certainly America has remained far more religious than, for example, Europe, and yet, egalitarian mores are more prevalent in Europe. So it's not as simple as you want to tell it.
But we watched in science class the movie Inherit the Wind. And Inherit the Wind is this movie based on the Scopes trial, 1925, I think, unless it was 24. And the thing about the movie is that it looked like it was pitting the scientifically educated people against the religious rubes. And there are all these, fat...
And for the most part, that is true. They were.
Uneducated people from this Tennessee town with signs saying, give us that old-time religion, and they walk around chanting and singing.
Yeah.
But what you don't know is that no one teaches you that the textbook Scopes was using was a eugenics textbook. So it didn't just teach Darwinian evolution. It had 5 categories for races, and
So a coercive eugenics textbook, right? But eugenics can be non-coercive, so I just kind of throw that in. But got to go back and listen to me read out that Diana F. essay. Crucial distinctions for any kind of sensible talk on eugenics. It can be coercive or non-coercive. So yes, it was bad that there were those coercive components to eugenics, but at the same time, there are some corner cases where, like at the very beginning of that essay, it's siblings. The German state prevented those siblings from having yet another kid or took their kids away from them, however it was. Would the guest, what's the guest's name? Hang on, let me just get the guest's name. Jonathan Rosen. So would Jonathan Rosen say the German state was wrong to do that? Or maybe they were cousins?
Bottom, you can imagine. The ones at the top were Northern Europeans. And it even
Right.
talks about mental defectives and how if they were animals, we would sterilize them or euthanize them. But instead, we will segregate them. And so actually, couldn't have been a more illiberal, appalling work. So on the one hand, it was enlightened, you might think, because it accepted this new theory of evolution.
In a very narrow range of cases, coercion is justified. If not, then you have to disagree with the German state in that specific example, and many such examples where they don't just do it once. They want to have a big family and their siblings. So now we have to what? We have to bite the bullet and say they weren't created equal because we believe they don't have the right to procreate in terms of it being incestuous. So insofar as you'll agree that when it comes to the incestuous cases, we take the interest of the prospective child seriously enough to incorporate, in, again, very narrow range of cases, coercion to prevent them from doing so or to take their kids away. But if they're extremely mentally defective and are having non-incestuous children, then all coercion is off limits. I don't think that flies. I think in the vast majority of cases, coercion is unjustified in these procreative contexts. If two individuals want to do it, fair enough. But AIDS patients, for example, it's very much should be on the table, and it doesn't make people who believe it should be on the table, coercive correctives. It doesn't mean that they are these social Darwinists. No, it's just you don't want a fucking drooling child, a child who's just going to essentially drool all their life long.
Immediately misapplied, overapplied it, and used it to demonize the foundational idea that everyone can be equal, whether they're smart or not smart, and whatever their...
Yeah, so no one should be demonized unless they really are that insufferable and think that it's not a big deal that my child is not just, less smart than average, but it's not a big deal that my child is a lifelong drooler, because that's all they can do, because they don't have two brain cells to rub together. That I kind of don't mind demonizing that type of prospective parent. But people whose IQ is just room temperature, that's fine. I'm just saying there are these cases of extremity, and when you talk about everyone being created equal, then you can't, your theory, your kind of religious defense of this cannot account even for those. So that's a problem for you. Because Christianity does say, everyone is created equal. Doesn't matter how defective they are. If all they can do is literally drool, they were created equal. That's the kind of polar end of the problem. There's two polarities here, and you're only paying attention to one. Oh, and I guess trigger warning for what you just saw. A lot of this stuff is graphic, so a belated trigger warning for what you just saw because the song just finished and I can't put this before the song. Well, I can because the video's not up yet. But then the bit would be ruined. The post hoc trigger warning bit wouldn't work if I just put the trigger warning when it's supposed to go. So instead, I'll keep it delayed so the bit can work. But yes, trigger warning. Just this, there's an epic Scott Alexander blog post. He's talking about how the impact of dramatic events and the coverage of dramatic events, they should not change things for us epistemically, like we learned of any given dramatic event that happened that it's going to be talked about and extensively covered, go down in the annals of time. Like that event does not impact things epistemically for us. We don't gain epistemically by having learned of some dramatic event. No, but nonetheless, those things matter from a coordination standpoint. It's probably the best summary of that whole blog post. But he just got to the point where he mentioned how there's certain people who get tough on sexual harassment. He's talking about the birth of Me Too and how Harvey Weinstein was necessary from a coordination standpoint, even though we didn't learn anything about any norms in Hollywood because the Harvey Weinstein story was uncovered. But this was the standout example for me because I wanted to get rhetorical about what he's talking about. So he said, people who want to get tough on sexual harassment in reference to Me Too. And I'm just thinking, why don't we use a term like sexual harassment hawks or just, kind of sexual hawks? I mean, the word war hawk has had such staying power because there are war hawks out there. There are these hardliners who embolden and lead to these brinkmanships, right? Often these hardliners, militarist hardliners, we call them war hawks. We know what a hawk is. It's not just some generic neoconservative or just some other kind of buzzy neg word. No, Warhawk gets at something. And likewise, Scott Alexander just called all these kind of Me Too overzealous people, quote unquote, people who want to get tough on sexual harassment. But I'm just thinking, instead of saying people who want to be tough on it, let's call them sexual harassment hawks or just sexual hawks. Or maybe harassment hawks, so we can encompass other types of non-sexual harassment. But it seems that of all the ways that people get uppity about the issue of harassment, it skyrockets when it comes to sexual harassment. That's why we'll never stop. Just like we're never going to stop talking about 2016. I've got that record 3016, and it ends with talking forever about 2016. In the same kind of way, we're going to be talking forever about one or another kind of resurgent Me Too after Me Too cools down. There's going to be resurgent ones because the original cooled down. And so I want to call these people sexual hawks or harassment hawks or something where it's like it's understood that they are also comprised just of the types of people who believe that there are no misandrists ever. To call back to another track now, I've got a track. There are no misandrists ever. There are people who they never put on the spot where they have to explicitly state a sentence like there are no misandrists ever. But it's clear that they believe that there are no misandrists ever, or else these kinds of out of whack norms in terms of now, socially, even though legally we're going to keep saying innocent till proven guilty, socially we're going to start saying, no, it depends on the gender or on the sex of the accuser and the accused with various hashtags to back it up. So you kind of have to think if that's a one-sided game, you have to think that there are no misandrists ever. Because if you believed in misandrists, that they exist and that they're often very, very motivated, right? You would not be comfortable with a policy that says, believe all and whatever group of people you want to pile onto that. I don't want to be too explicit because I'm being graphically explicit. So yes, the people we should call sexual hawks are the very kinds of people who don't have to say it, but they believe it. In their heart of hearts, they believe that there are no misandrists ever. There's only structural sexism, by which we mean things that eternally disadvantage women and eternally advantage men. And we're going to split men and women in this way politically. And that's, in part, it has to be. If we have a soul, in part it has to be because we also believe, factually speaking, that there are no misandrists ever. If we believed in misandrists and had a soul, we would not back these one-sided policies, because then we would see that there's some non-trivial number of misandrists who will use these policies to their advantage, to the detriment of their victims, and land innocent men in jail. We can't say believe all, and you know the group I'm talking about. Believe all, hashtag believe all, when we know that factually speaking, there's a non-zero number of misinterests in society and deep society. And the further deep you go into society, the higher the concentration of misinterests gets, because there's no pressure, there's no counter pressures to it. It's like, you know, if you called someone a racist in the 18th century, it wouldn't matter to them. In the same way, when I call certain people, certain individuals, men and women, by the way, there's a lot of misandric men, and kind of men who believe in male identity, disposability, and teach courses training men to dispose themselves of their identity so they can bed more women. And no one picks up on this because there's contrary to there are no misandrists ever. No, misandry is baked into the fabric. Misandry is baked into the fabric. But yeah, he was talking about Me Too. He was talking about Me Too in the blog post, and I just said, like, no, Scott, it's not just people who want to get tough on sexual harassment. It's sexual hawks who believe there are no misandrists ever. Or who believe there are misandrists and are just that damn demonic. And say, okay, go misandrists, have at it. These are the policies I believe, and the social norms we've set up is, yeah, misandrists, have at it. Legal systems got you covered. I did not think I would use Duckman as the visuals for the background, but I'm watching the old shows and it's so good. It's weird with Duckman. I bought the DVDs in 2009 and rewatched all of it because I grew up to this stuff. It's a wonder why I'm so irreverent. So I started watching Duckman when I was 11. They ran it on Canada's Teletoon. And then I hadn't watched it for a long time because they just didn't broadcast it anywhere. And then I got it in 2009. I got all 4 seasons. And I watched it and I was underwhelmed. I think in 2009, I was at a point where I wanted shows to just be explicit and articulate in terms of all these ideological things. And any show that wasn't, and that was more character driven, or as in the case of Duckman, just a lot of really absurdist kind of humoristic writing. But I was underwhelmed because I'd started doing YouTube in 2009, and anything that was going to be worthwhile in terms of watching, it would have to be like ultra articulate and ultra, explicit in terms of what the ideological mission is. But now I rewatched it because all of these are on YouTube now in their entirety. I have no idea where my DVD is that I bought of the 4 seasons, but I just rewatched all these on YouTube, and it's so great. And I thought, well, there's at least 2 episodes that work with the theme of 2 distinct themes within this video, so let's use some visuals. And some of the things that aligned, I threw this in just randomly, and I didn't think it would align so well in both the episodes, I think, right? The one with the nut house, A Room with a Bellevue. It's just when I'm talking about this mental health stuff, I threw it in and it lined up so perfectly with what I was saying through no effort. And then with this one, I think, is when I said there are no misandrists ever, as all the misandrists started chasing him, all the sexual harassment hawks. So yeah, another one of these things where it's just things align perfectly without any effort. What else did I want to say here before I move on to the last part of this now too long video? I guess this was another gender appetizer thing. I have a lot more to say about this whole male identity disposability, which was just a very, very brief tangent, but more to come on that much later. It just shows why the Manosphere crew is failure. They keep repeating themselves. They keep parroting things about male disposability by way of the draft and conscription and all these old problems that in the West are by and large no longer targeting men alone. But very few advocates for men's interests have identified this problem of male identity disposability, which I will explore at length in the future. This is not a gender video. This was just another one of these like kind of small gender appetizers. But yeah, this was Duckman visuals, impromptu as always, and yet fitting really well. It's the way Shop put it. If you set about to do something great, you have to follow the rules without knowing them.
I found it. All 4 seasons. I didn't misplace it. I don't know why. I randomly said I misplaced it when that's not it. I just never played these because whatever I did have in '09 for playing DVDs, I don't have now. But that's okay because they're all on YouTube. But yeah, just because I'm OCD and if I say something that's not true, I don't want to take it out. I want to do an additional add-on and then include that into the video. I didn't misplace these DVDs. They just gathered a lot of dust because most of the kind of things that I would have been interested in getting on DVD back then, they're not like copyright hawks, and so they would all be freely on YouTube now anyway. But yeah, these are great. And hang on, I want to do this.
Yeah, misinterests, have at it. Legal systems got you covered.
Kill the Duckman. Kill the Duckman.
Think I was...
See, when it comes to these little things, I agonize because I'm just so damn OCD. And yeah, it is February 28th. I agonize. Like, should I just leave it as blank or should I throw in a little? Because I don't want to include the actual audio of them going, kill the Duckman, kill the Duckman. But then I'm like, it needs to be a little bit of dead air. But then I think, like, does it need to be dead air or should it be a little musical interval of something? Just the kind of stuff that I just keep making my life far more difficult than it needs to be. All these agonies over the little things. And then when I look at where other people are, it's like just nothing. It's all about victory. Talk on the internet because you want to win. Be ant-like. Don't be artful. Don't think about little things that I think about. I think I am going to leave it blank because I just, yeah, I'm too tired at this point.
This Duckman as the visuals.
I can't play any of this for fear of copyright, but you see there the residue of Kenny, who was just killed by the new Canadian PM. Hard to believe this episode is over 2 decades old at this point, but that's the big reveal. I hadn't seen it in so long. I'm just watching it now. The new PM just killed Kenny. But Scott makes a return here, and it's really Scott that's the standout of this now 2+ decade old Christmas South Park special, where they go to Canada to rescue Ike from his biological parents, because I guess they just love him more, but it's not even established. But the whole thing takes on a Alice in Wonderland spin. It's so masterfully done, and I love this show for not taking itself seriously. I think this was the height of them not taking themselves seriously, just at all. It's brought about the best in these specials where they inhabit foreign lands. But Scott, who is such a dick, I completely forgot about Scott. But he is, in terms of cartoon characters, he just best personifies as the single character talking about American war scum. He just best personifies kind of the Palestinian from the river to the sea, spouty, grumpy approach to argumentation or whatever they want to call it. It's essentially, I just view them as Scott. It's like they are Scott. Scott's generic, know-nothing anti-Americanism, visceral, kind of homespun Canadian anti-Americanism. That is kind of what I see. Like if Scott the Dick were brown, it would be from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, qua movement. It would just be a bunch of brown Scots. If IRL reflected South Park, it would just be like Scott, but like very often the brown Scott, because he's such a dick and a know-nothing and the whole 9 freaking yards.
And speaking of, what do the kids like to say? Honk honk. Say honk honk in quick succession a number of times and it'll lose meaning. The word honk will lose meaning quicker than any other word comparatively when you say it enough times and it loses meaning. It's more true of honk than any other one. But honk honk is what the kids like to say, so I'll use it, I'll incorporate it here as a mimetic thing. Honk honk. These protesters are sprinkled all throughout the lower mainland, but they're especially condensed around the bridge area, so they've been shutting down traffic across bridges quite a bit. But they can't even do that right, because every single bridge they choose, it's not the bridge that I require to commute to work. So it's never the case that I have a valid excuse to not show up to work because of the protesters, because they always choose some random bridge that I don't require for my commute. So they can't even fucking do that right. God, it hasn't even been a full day. It's only been 18 hours since I posted the people dying channel, where I'm complaining about how there is no such thing, but it's the title of the video, but there's no such thing, but there should be, because people should stare the worst of life. If you love life, you should stare the worst of life and demand to see it as a specialty channel, where you just kind of watch people die. So I posted this video 18 hours ago, the people dying channel. There's a great contradiction, given what I read out in the chapter on the doctrine of the denial of the will to live. I'm not even going to sum it up. Just listen to the chapter. What I read out and how I end the video talking about how, well, you can do the Nietzschean thing on me. So I unwisdom myself at the end of the freaking video and leave a just deliberate contradiction. But I'm just manic in the episode. I had a manic episode in that very second to last after the Crow audio. I had this manic episode. And I said, and I still believe it in a weird way, yeah, you can do the Nietzschean thing on me insofar as the night is workless and I'm non-occupational. But it's just such a contradiction. And I had the fact that I had read out the chapter in mind, but my manic overhaul just forced me to do an audio like that, announcing in the audio that it had to be within that video, and then just leaving this deliberate contradictory nature to the video. Well, I still think that there's what the chapter describes in terms of there being the denial of the will to live is analogous to salvation, and the assertion of the will to live is analogous to sin and the heathen point of view. I still think that makes Christianity make a hell of a lot of sense. But at the same time, I'm not frightened about the prospect of eternal recurrence, the Nietzschean thing, coming after me, insofar as I never have to go to work. Like every non-work night I've experienced, every non-school night I've experienced in my life, like just give me the visceral reaction. I have to explain to the world my visceral reaction when you tell me that will be run in perpetuity. Like I'd be lying if I said I felt dread or fear, right? So this is like a contradiction. I'm not going to resolve it here, but I'm just kind of, it's been 18 hours since the video went up. I'm like, will anyone spot it? Will anyone spot it? I don't think anyone's going to spot it. But, you know, I have to freaking delay YouTube as dumpster fire by yet one more video. Because I like it a lot less than the video you just finished listening to. Those audios are a lot more recent than the YouTube anniversary video. YouTube is dumpster fire. They're a lot more recent, so I should be chronological, but I cheated here. I posted a video, and so it's YouTube is dumpster fire will hopefully be the next one. But this is the outro, and I just figured I'd kind of explain that. I delayed it by yet one more video, because I just like it less. It's a specialty kind of video. I bitch about YouTube probably a little too much. And I bring back some antics at the end. But yeah, this is going to be the, why we fail the victims of madness, and then I talk about the other stuff. But, I think probably the strongest part of this video is the beginning, and that podcast. And we do still continue to fail the victims of madness, but you know what? It's in the nature of things that we fail them, because we would inconvenience ourselves way too much if we had never failed them. They are ill fit for society. When they suffer from that true, kind of pre-Freudian sense of madness, that worst of the worst thing, where these people who believed it was all about marginalization and poverty and, essentially treated their patients by giving them a better diet and yoga. This is more just world hypothesis to always attribute madness, as they did in that era, to purely environmental factors. Just world, not even belief, because it's not a belief, it's a just world attitude. So many of these things don't even reach the point of belief in the proper philosophical sense. You deliberate over what you're going to believe a great deal after you commit yourself to the belief. People don't have that. So it's not just world belief, it's just world attitude. People crave that just world sense. It's a sense. And so things like madness, things like madness must have correctives. They must have correctives because they're institutional, by golly. Society fails them. Late capitalism fails them. It's got to be in one or another sense environmental. And so just pick your favorite institutions. The cons have their theories. No, it's these proggy institutions that induce madness in people. Hence, liberalism is a mental disorder, right? I can go on, but anyway, this is just an outro to say, yeah, I did the recent audios before, the older audios, yeah, that people dying channel video has this weird tension. I'm praising the chapter and how it portrays Christianity, but then I'm saying you can do the Nietzschean thing on me. Well, that's not the denial of the will. I don't deny the will in practice. I just deny it for the most part when I when I do YouTube videos. God, if I denied it in practice, I would talk about my track, Pro-Mortalist Suicide Hotlines. There's this whole records about this stuff. Pro-Mortalist Suicide Hotlines. That's something you're also never going to see. You're never going to see the people dying channel, and you're never going to see Pro-Mortalist Suicide Hotlines where they hear you out, and it's like, oh gosh, it really is that bad. You ought to just deny. You ought to go to Switzerland and just negate yourself and deny the will to live. Very quickly, something was omitted from the people dying channel right about here.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. We'll see how bad the libs get on immigration, and maybe I'll not vote for them. But I never vote anyway, so it's all moot. I haven't voted since 2011.
And right there, instead of talking about how if I could go back, I wouldn't, I should have gotten more specific, folks. But the truth is, I'm deeply ashamed. So I want to reveal here why I just kind of slipped past the worst part of that. Why did I say if I can go back to 2011, I wouldn't have voted? Right? Just like I thought that, Trudeau was, even by 2015, I thought Trudeau was the lesser of the kind of political, not evils, but I thought Trudeau was the lesser of the political errors, I guess, the political kind of fumblers. There was less ineptitude in terms of knowing how to get things done in Justin Trudeau than his opponents and his biggest political rivals. Even by 2013, I thought this. I think otherwise now. But in terms of 2011, when I talk about how if I can go back, I would undo that, I'm deeply ashamed. But in 2011, all of this will make sense now. So I'm going to reveal something truly awful about me. I've been in the closet for the longest time in terms of who I voted for. The one time I voted in 2011, I've been in the closet about this because I'm deeply ashamed of my 2011. This was May 2011. So the one time I cast the ballot. In 2011, I voted for the NDP, and I thought I was making a good decision. And so what I see how I think it's unnecessary to confess that in this video, but Jesus, listen.
If I could go back, I wouldn't have voted in 2011. Yeah, maybe. We'll see. We'll see how bad the libs get on immigration, and maybe I'll not vote for them. But I never.
But it's not about maybe not vote for them. They were never. It was the NDP. It was worse. It was worse. It was the kind of people who use words like climate justice and environmental justice, unironically, as part of some greater, tidal wave of justice that's about to come in if you just vote them in, right? Among the types of justice were climate and environmental justice. And boy, aren't we going to kind of eye Gaia while we're doing all this? We're going to, coyly just eye Gaia. Maybe not say anything overtly. And just romanticize the environment in the process. And, everything is about the indigenous. Since 2019, here in Canada, insofar as there's a kind of heated political discussion, something like over 95% of the time, it's about the fucking indigenous and how we've stolen their land. This is a kind of commemoration and a kind of, for certain institutions to participate in them, there's rites of initiation where you got to spout this. And sometimes you got to learn the foreign tongue in respect to the indigenous. As a white person, you got to read out these things about how, the white, about how the whites stole from them. And you got to pronounce all their freaking hard to pronounce names. And if you don't do that, you don't get initiated into the clan.
But that's like all Canada's been about since 2019. It's this indigenous stuff, and it's the NDP types that drive that crap. And I voted for the NDP in 2011. I'm deeply ashamed of it.
Never vote anyway, so it's all moot. I haven't voted since 2011. And if I could go back, I wouldn't have voted in 2011 either.
And now you know why.
But the last thing to note about...
Okay, just one more addition to the People Dying channel, and really a clarification that has to be visual. Most people, especially from the States and elsewhere, probably have no idea who this gentleman is, but I grew up watching him because I grew up watching Hockey Night in Canada. And in the first intermission, the first of the two intermissions, and he'd come back for the OT if there were these intermissions during the playoffs especially. There were these intermissions between the 20-minute OT periods. This is kind of the golden age of the NHL and the Canadian teams. So I watched me some NHL, especially the first half of the 2000s, and I had just a blast watching the Don Cherry intermissions, watching the Coach's Corner. And that's why it kind of just pained me to go on to learn, well, the kind of stuff that I visually take shots at here. Don Cherry is just this guy who, the moment you challenge him with an alternative perspective, instead of really engaging the perspective, just spews this kind of, I'm going to make my life ultra convenient for myself and just call things pinkos and just be a kind of pinko spewing machine instead of truly engaging with arguments. And being a cliche machine in terms of when he's not even countering people, but he's just kind of starting from scratch. These guys paid for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada. Yeah, but we can just complicate it because a lot of people who did good things are in other areas of their lives scumbags. And then there's the other side of the coin, and that is if you want to say that like non-pinkos are pinkos, but then because some of the pinkos are ultra brave, like the Soviet Union troops during World War II were ultra brave. Am I then gonna like make you say you ought to love the pinkos and you ought to also pay tribute to those pinkos who are actual Soviets? No, that'd be ridiculous. But you're kind of doing that.
It's not about this poppy and controversy, this exhibitive stuff that Don Cherry wants you to care about. No, Remembrance Day is supposed to be, whether you can muster that deeply felt, sincerely felt appreciation and gratitude for those troops who sacrificed a lot in the past. And, maybe the current existence of the nation you're enjoying hinges specifically on certain cluster of individuals who chose to make those kinds of sacrifices. And boy, don't you want to say something about it at least once a year? And don't we all as a group want to say something about it?
Of course, as I'm doing the audio initially, I have no idea what I'm going to use as visuals. And then I'm thinking, like, okay, the point can be taken as it is. I'm summarizing Remembrance Day, and I'm kind of steel-manning Remembrance Day, right? It's about whether you can earnestly feel what you're supposed to feel, not about whether you can exhibit it well by wearing a poppy and I guess donating $2 to the vets or whatever. But then, the damn Pinkos guy puts himself in a position, if he wants to be consistent, if it's about courage and kind of beating the bad guys, right, you can't damn pinkos all the time. And I guess this is the kind of humor that, I think is best just unmentioned, but, like if you people don't watch these videos, then you're missing on the whole element of the humor. Watch, as in watch literally, where listening is not good enough, like downloading it and listening to it on the go. I think half the stuff at this point with the way I do videos now, half the stuff would just be you going, what the hell is he talking about? No, you need to watch it, not as in click my videos, but no, literally watch the videos, because that's the direction the channel's been taken. I don't understand anyone who approaches YouTube the exact same way in their 10th season of being a YouTuber as they do in their first season. I don't understand people like that. There's some shows, there's a certain way when they start, like maybe they take themselves seriously. And then the longer the show runs, the less seriously it takes itself. Yeah, that's how you should be as a YouTuber if you have good taste. As a broadcaster, as whatever, as a internet persona or internet communicator, you ought to take yourself less seriously the longer you do it. And I'm just not seeing that with anyone. It's the ultimate kind of Sisyphean thing. When I see someone who's been on YouTube forever and they're every bit as their modus operandi is every bit as non-ironical and non-sardonic and non-acebric. Acebric? There's a word like that. It sounds like acebric. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But yeah, you people are just so stunted. the vast majority of you. I cannot believe it. I cannot believe that you can't see how doing YouTube with the same kind of seriousness, zeal late in your YouTube career as you did when you started it just makes you look like a show that just doesn't evolve. Imagine a show whose, whatever, season 15 is identical in everything as season 1 is. No. And really, realistically, the only way, given how clownish the world itself is, the only way to progress is to just get less serious the more you do it. So yeah, watching these videos, you want to watch my video, you want to listen to my videos, listen to the old school videos where the visuals don't matter. You watch contemporary, no avail, you literally got to watch it. Or else this weird, well, the weirdness will seem weird. But anyway, yeah, a guy like Don Cherry shows, probably better than anyone else you can point to, shows just how much moral reductionism there is in nationalism, because he's on record as thinking nationalism is not a dirty word. Maybe it's not a dirty word, but it's a lame thing to be, just because of how much moral reductionism there is. You have to squint to not see the virtues in non-countrymen that you see in your countrymen. Because there's these other, I guess, grander forces where the two countries are at odds. So you just have to do that fundamental attribution error and kind of force it upon you. In this case, courage with the, Soviet troops. He loves brave soldiers, but I've never once heard him say something positive about the brave Soviet troops in World War II, because he has to live in a black and white world. And that complicates things. That injects an element of gray. It's like, yeah, everything with my mother's milk has been presented to me as everything Soviet bad. But then I really like courage and courageous people taking down the bad guy. Well, it's like, then you should be able to, at least in those circumstances, see that the Soviets took down the bad guy. It was 8 decades ago, so it's not like it's even a threat right now for anything, but he still can't do it. Because you have to be a moral reductionist to care about this nationhood stuff. So I guess that's my rant to end it. Don Cherry sucks, and he ought to not be so reductionistic.